Hello and welcome to Maverick Dreamers and Thinkers. I'm Chloe Cho. As we try to reboot and step into a world of strange new norms of infection fears, travel restrictions, and questions about life post-coronavirus, we can't help but wonder what is next. What we've learned from the pandemic is that the world can come to a standstill in an instant and usher in a whole new paradigm with no turning back. Some believe that coronavirus has fast-forwarded our lives by 5 years or even more. If so, does the new reality force us to look at our world differently?
Are we alone in this universe? And if we are, why do we exist? And why is there not life anywhere else on other planets? And then also the question of how should we go about looking for intelligence? SpaceX, the largest telecommunication company in the world in the making and a great logistics company, will not be affected by the pandemic very much. If you ask me what are you investing in, I'm not investing in AI per se, but yes, of course, AI enabled. In fact, I don't even call it artificial intelligence. I don't think it's so artificial. It's augmented intelligence. Artificial intelligence to me implies a kind of intelligence that's really different from mine in a way that I don't recognize it. It has its own consciousness or something. It doesn't. So it's augmented intelligence. So it's our intelligence just a little faster and better than ours.
You must get this all the time. Reema Khan is actually a famous actress, TV host in Pakistan.
You know what's hilarious is, it's so funny because when I first learned about her, and when I was in Tokyo, the translator came up to me because I was supposed to give a talk at the Foreign Correspondents Club and said, you're a really interesting woman. You have had such a dynamic career. You're also an actress. And it didn't click that she's talking about that. I said, I am?
Meet Reema Khan, who often gets mistaken for the famous Pakistani actress with the same name. She certainly looks the part, but their professions couldn't be any more different. Reema, who is part Saudi Arabian, is a rare breed in the male-dominated cutthroat world of high finance. As CEO and founder of Green Sands Equity, a boutique private equity firm headquartered in San Francisco with offices in Tokyo, Dubai, Zurich, and Singapore, Reema has been quite the deal maker even amid the lockdowns, closing 6 deals so far this year. The deal flow in part reflects the flurry of activity that's been taking place, especially in the tech space, as the hunt is on for businesses that benefit from not only virus-related restrictions, but also longer-term shifts in society, such as remote working.
We've actually closed 6 investments this year already, and they have been mostly in the biotech sector, and a couple of them have been in security and data space.
How do you close deals when much of the year has been locked down?
GSC is the main company. Then we have 9 funds under it, under the Green Sands GP. And then we have the Green Sands Strategist, which is a company that does the strategy work and advisory work and the political work. And then we have a holding company which owns factories, manufacturing, income generating assets, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like an evergreen fund sort of a structure. Recently, we had a great opportunity. We still have it on the table. We need to buy out a factory in Canada. And we can't do it because it's my fiduciary responsibility that I don't just do the audits and look at everything else, but somebody has to go visit it. So I have somebody in Canada, in Montreal, like, can you drive over? Can we do this? But even if he did, there's nobody there. So that is the kind of thing that is stuck. But when it comes to biotech sector, healthcare sector, it's fine. Most of the companies we invest in are not the kind of companies where you need to verify, do they really exist or is somebody trying to cheat me? They've existed for 7 to 10 years usually. So they're fine and very well validated and substantiated. What is the problem that technology is trying to solve? And those problems, if you state them in human terms, they become very simple and straightforward. So technology is a tool to help you solve a real problem. And if you think that way, there isn't a lot of confusion. It all starts from us humans.
You've closed about 6 deals so far this year, right? What's the total size that we're talking about?
We try to keep it very private. We don't list our portfolio. We don't have logos of companies floating there. That's a VC thing to do. We're not VCs. So our mindset isn't that. I think given the work that we do on the advisory side and on the political side, we have learned the value of being discreet and quiet. Generally speaking, we will not disclose the size. In fact, we don't even go on the cap table for a lot of our investments in the name of Green Sands Equity itself. Often it might be the name of the largest LP in that consortium of investors that are going in that deal. We're pretty global. All of us were from different countries and different backgrounds. A lot of the times that when we talk about a global company, when we sit in the US or Silicon Valley, it means we sell to the globe. That's not global. Global is when you involve the globe in the making of something. A lot of our manufacturing is done outside the US. Now, how does a finance company like ours, or investment company, advisory company become truly global? By being humble and by having a local presence and having a partnership with local representative of that country and working with them instead of going there and telling them what to do.
The world of private equity deals, I think the impression was that there was so much froth that you would see private equity companies even fighting over Taylor Swift songs. Do you remember that last year? They run out of deals. So later on, people are fighting over Taylor Swift songs. They're fighting over some chicken restaurant in Kansas somewhere. So did this pandemic bring some of the valuations down to reality so that you actually end up having better pickings?
Well, yes and no. Public markets are sentimental and they are affected very quickly by rumors, politics, climate, wars, every kind of thing that can happen. Moods, they are kind of corrected and marked to market as far as their pricing. When it comes to private equity, no one knows what the value of something is. It just depends on what someone is willing to pay for it. If the public market dropped by 30%, then private company valuations will also drop by 30%. It's not equal at all. In fact, private company valuations drop at a much lower percentage compared to the public equities that drop very quickly when under certain circumstances. So I think that the corrections in the public market haven't even happened. So the private market corrections definitely have not happened. And I do think that they will happen a little bit later on. Right now, I think we're still a little bit overpaying.
And how has the pandemic affected the way you think and the way you perceive the business opportunities out there, the way you perceive the world, really?
So where is the smart money going, right? In this current environment? Is smart what yields you the highest returns, or is smart something that gets you the greatest progress and innovation? So I think when it comes to what gets you the best returns, it's a lot of very immediate things that people are investing in, like telehealth is doing well. Companies that are virtual, like Zoom and all, are doing really well. A lot of supply of like masks and things like that, those things. And of course, a lot of the infrastructure companies are doing really well in this space. One good thing that came out of this whole coronavirus thing is that it gave biology that boost that it needed. It's been said for a while that this century will be defined by biology and not technology. They're both so intertwined. Intersection of data and biology is really important. It's going to help accelerate the progress and innovation in drug discovery, understanding diseases, understanding the genomics. So it's going to be very interesting to combine data from various fields in a multidisciplinary way.
While Reema is cagey about the scope of her deals this year, Green Sands Equity, or GSE, is known for making late-stage investments, and some of those investments have included well-known startups from SpaceX, Spotify, Airbnb, to China's Didi Chuxing. GSE, Green Sands Equity, has invested in a bevy of well-known startups from Airbnb, Lyft, Spotify, SpaceX, Didi Chuxing to Encoded. How will this acceleration of AI, automation, and business lines to pandemic-proof operations, how will that really transform some of these companies in your view?
So there are more companies beyond the ones you listed, but I will talk about the ones you mentioned. So SpaceX, again, is going to be fine because it actually, I call SpaceX the largest telecommunication company in the world in the making and a great logistics company. It will not be affected by the pandemic very much. Now let's talk about Encoded Genomics, a gene therapy company, Encoded Therapeutics, the gene therapy company. That's actually great. Healthcare is seeing a boost, and so it's going to do fine. Spotify is doing great. Airbnb has taken a big hit, but what makes Airbnb really awesome is Brian himself, the CEO. He cut down the workforce as quickly as he could, and he took on a whole lot of money, both in debt and in equity. And he was sensible in marking down the valuation of the company. Marriott and all the other hotel franchises that it's often compared to, they've seen a drop from 40 to 60% in valuation. And Airbnb only dropped, the money it took was at a 16% decline in valuation. So it's pretty good. I also think that with Airbnb, they have these online experiences, this new streaming kind of a business, which will take some money to put together, or to just kind of wait it out and see what happens. And they're doing the best they can in terms of policies and whatnot. But if you take the long-term view, eventually people have to travel. It would still be cheaper than all the hotels out there. And Airbnb might even be a great acquisition target at some point by one of those big, large hotel franchises who are so real estate heavy. And Airbnb doesn't have that problem, right? However, it will be a difficult 2 to 3 years.
Airbnb has been among the hardest hit by the COVID-19 travel freeze worldwide, which resulted in a reduced internal valuation of $26 billion. The pandemic has also dealt a blow to ride-hailing apps from Uber, Lyft to China's Didi Chuxing, eroding their efforts to become profitable. Didi Chuxing controls 90% of China's ride-hailing market after buying out its rivals, including Uber's operations on the mainland. The company was banking on 2020 to shake off years of losses and controversy over the 2018 murder of 2 female passengers before the virus struck.
What about companies like Lyft and Didi Chuxing?
So Lyft is doing fine, actually hasn't been hurt as much because the company is very well run. I like that company a lot, or the culture as well. Didi is the one that actually is most interesting to me because they always have a head start when it comes to mobility companies. I think Didi Chuxing is probably ahead of any company in the world in terms of technology, in terms of the data that they have, their usage of data, AI, everything. So if you look at the policies that they've already put in place with the division between the passenger and the driver to make sure that they're healthy, when it comes to self-driving cars, they're going to be the first ones to be able to do that. Again, that might be a good thing because you don't want to sit in a car with another driver because it's people we're scared of, not machines right now. And so, right, they have a lot more cash than any other company in the space. Especially in China, they were facing a lot of competition, but now the competition can't afford to stay afloat. If I had a choice between taking an Uber and going on a bus with 100 other people or 20 or 30 other people in coronavirus times, I would take the Uber. So same applies to Didi. I mean, look at Didi's revenue. I mean, it had 40-some billion dollars in revenue, and its valuation is pretty reasonable. So it's a huge difference. And given the amount of money that Didi raised compared to the amount of money that Uber raised, Didi knocks it way out of the park.
Didi Chuxing has just raised another $500 million to fund its autonomous driving unit for a total of $18.9 billion and has a valuation of $56 billion. Uber, meanwhile, has raised $24.5 billion in total and has a market cap of $63 billion. Didi's biggest shareholders include Apple, SoftBank, Alibaba, and Tencent, and is growing its international footprint in Japan, Australia, and Latin America. Post-coronavirus, Didi is on track to hitting its targets of processing 100 million orders per day worldwide and reaching 800 million monthly active users within 3 years.
There's a lot of debate as to whether this pandemic, this virus, is going to completely transform industries and even trigger career migration. How are you looking at the trend?
What is the economy going to be like? What are we going to care about? What industries and sectors will survive and what won't? I mean, I think the restaurant and hotel industry is going to be a while before they recover. I think that commercial real estate is going to take a big hit. I think on the positive side, we will see a lot of innovation. I think that we will see the rise of possibly local manufacturing because of borders being so strict and so much posturing and political issues that we're having with each other. We may see a boost in agriculture, supply chain management. We may see more updated policies in biotech sector to speed up time to market, policies that make the process more efficient and not just fast and unsafe. And I think our relationship with technology will change. We will trust it more and we will interact with it differently. For example, I travel almost 10 days a month, meeting with the founders of the companies and then the CEOs of companies. It's all about relationships, a lot of lunches, dinners, and conversations in conference rooms, and that's all going away. If I said to somebody, hey, instead of me flying out to Zurich, why don't we just do a video call? They might even feel disrespected normally, right? And so now when you do that, it's fine. And not only that, we're so authentic on that call. Another interesting thing that's happening is, let's say the price of oil went down, right, to negative. Actually, it is the first time in history ever. However, did you pay any less at the pump than you were paying? No, you didn't. Same goes for the retail industry a little bit. Do you think that things cost a lot less when you go shopping? Probably not. I mean, from what I can see, they cost exactly the same. So it's a strange time where people are going to try to sustain this surreal time as much as they can with this expectation that this is all going to end soon. When we realize that it's not going to end soon is when the market will probably correct a little bit more. So I think that's a big disconnect that's happening right now.
There's a lot of talk about this pandemic ushering in a new paradigm. Are your investment profiles changing?
We're going back to a little bit of old-fashioned thinking that should have never left us. I think being frugal is a virtue again. We have very heavily relied on growth and consumption to a point of losing sight of old-fashioned metrics like margin, profitability, efficiency, sustainable scalability. There is a lot of rush in the market for financial investors coming in to rescue these companies that are dropping in valuation. This can go both ways because the companies are desperate. There is a rush to raise funding before the recession hits. And so because of that, there is too much funding actually being done right now in investments. So more investments have closed in this COVID-19 time than usual, actually, for the first 2 quarters of the year. There's a lot of confusion in the market because the stimulus packages and incentives by the government and the courtesy that we're extending to companies by saying that EBITDA is now EBITDAC, earnings before interest, this depreciation and amortization and coronavirus. We have to look at it after coronavirus as to where it is. So except for hospitality and aviation industry, which are appropriately marked down, many other companies' stock prices are still illogically high.
What do you think about this notion that China and the US heading towards sort of a new style Cold War? And things will start to get disrupted even more. Supply chain disruptions will, in fact, bring a lot of the production home for US companies. Do you think that's going to fundamentally reshape the global dynamic?
It already has happened, I feel. Let's look at the positive side of things. I think that it's good for China to be a bit more regulated to the same level as the rest of the world. So there's this new bill that was passed. If you're going to list on a US stock exchange, your accounting has to be done and has to be at the same standard and protocol as the rest of the US companies or all other companies that are listed there. And you have to disclose the numbers the way we ask all of the companies to disclose. And China has to comply because right now it's so shrouded in mystery that they hide everything. They don't tell us enough. So this is an opportunity for China to actually say, yeah, I don't have to play dirty to win. On the other side, there is going to be a very negative effect on a lot of US companies that have a lot of manufacturing in China. So this will depend a lot on who wins the election and how it turns out. I think if the Democrats win in the US, the anti-China rhetoric will probably soften up quite a bit. If we stay where we are, then you are absolutely right. We're not looking at a very positive outcome.
And in a shaken world, and this is a shaken world, is it a good time to make a global impact?
I think we shouldn't give up on innovation and exploration in a time like this, which is usually the first thing that goes. I do think that keeping the emphasis on thinking long-term is very, very important, and keeping that vision for how the world is evolving and what we want out of it, that's really important. The biggest problem that I see in the world in the future is inequality getting bigger. And it's becoming more apparent. When you're in small communities and everybody around you is similar to you, you don't feel so bad about yourself. But when you're comparing yourself to the next zip code and the one after and the one after, it gets harder and harder. So I think that's kind of an interesting effect that's happened, that it's taken away happiness from people who would have otherwise been happy in the simple things that they had. A equalizer was supposed to be technology, but 56% of the world still doesn't even have internet. So that doesn't help. When I look at how the world is evolving, is that the most important thing to understand is that our knowledge is also expanding at a pace that far exceeds Moore's law. We will gain more new knowledge and new understanding in the next 40 years than the accumulation of all human knowledge in the last 4,000 years. We'll gain more new knowledge and insights in the next 4 years than we did in the past 40 years. So the questions that we are compelled to ask, and we should be asking, is what is the L variable from the Drake equation, which is the longevity of our survival as a technological species. I feel we really need to invest in exploration and think 1,000 years ahead and not about immediate problems.
The Drake equation is a probabilistic formula to estimate the number of active, communicative extraterrestrial civilizations in the Milky Way galaxy, and the L variable refers to the length of time for civilizations to release detectable signals into space. The thinking originated in the 1960s, a period of social upheaval in America that had many hoping that if humans could do the unthinkable by sending astronauts to the moon, perhaps the feat could help solve a whole host of other problems, from racial tensions to the war in Vietnam. Is the world at a similar juncture today?
Are we alone in this universe? And if we are, why do we exist? And why is there not life anywhere else on other planets? And then also the question of how should we go about looking for intelligence? And in order to look for it, you first have to recognize what it is. And it's an interesting time because you don't just look at it from the point of view of what is human intelligence like, to try to measure what we would find recognizable, but also artificial intelligence, which makes it easier for us to be able to detect intelligence that may not be a lot like our own. Because why should we assume that any intelligence we run into would be similar to our own? It could be very different. Also, a really interesting point that often comes up is, if we did encounter intelligence from somewhere else, would it be somebody like an alien who shows up like with a body? And most likely we say that it's probably not going to be an organic kind of life, because it's trillions of light years away, these places, and even 1 light year is pretty big. So it's difficult for an organic life to survive that long. It would probably be some machine that self-repairs and somehow makes it here, like something that we created and built and just kept going and going and going, same as what we might encounter. So in order for us to learn about who created that machine, we would have to reverse engineer and understand how their mind worked and how their intelligence works. It's kind of a really interesting time to be thinking about those questions.
With the 21st century ushering in the knowledge age, the human civilization is more empowered and knowledgeable than ever before. If so, could this innovative era mark the renaissance of exploration, not by sea as previously done by European explorers from the 15th century, but rather towards outer space, in search of knowledge, new sources of wealth, and more practical, economically viable, and eco-friendly solutions? If Internet, IoT, and other technologies introduce the concept of digital twins and digital identities, what will space-based technology spell for a world that just celebrated SpaceX's launch, sending humans into orbit on the first ever private mission?
You mentioned that SpaceX is probably going to become a future telco. Do you see telecommunications really evolving beyond the realm of 5G to the point that maybe we have beams in outer space? And maybe that's what Elon Musk is trying to do.
They already announced it, I think it was last year. Yeah, it's low orbit satellites. So given climate change and whatnot and political issues and all these things that we have to deal with and lack of cooperation between telcos, it might be a good idea to have the infrastructure outside the biosphere. So it's a good idea, and it's not that crazy of an idea. It's very simple. In fact, the more of the infrastructure of the Earth you can move outside the biosphere, in many ways might be better for our environment.
SpaceX's mission is seen as an important step in the commercial use of low Earth orbit, the region covering up to 1,200 kilometers above the Earth, where the International Space Station and most satellites are located. Could space-based technologies be the next frontier following AI? As much as the shift would require a rethink of how we source our technologies, Reema says there needs to be a reevaluation of the current economic system to address the flaws that have flared up tension and unrest.
Oh my God!
What is philanthropy, right? It's the desire to promote the welfare of others through giving of resources and wealth at below market price. That's the way I look at it. And so that's helpful. What we need is reconsideration of our economic systems. Our economic systems are based on certain assumptions of market forces and human nature. And then came COVID-19, and there goes our trust in market forces. And then we look for stimulus packages and everything towards the government. So does market find its balance really quickly in current economic models? Not really. Does it solve for income inequality? Not really. Like, is the thinking behind it that if we save all the big companies, those companies will then be able to sustain the jobs, and therefore indirectly we're helping unemployment? So I think what we need to do is we need to rethink how we can be more collaborative. So we just have to be a little bit more socially responsible. I think our economic systems definitely have to change. We have to understand that they haven't worked. COVID-19 really proved it, that's when we started looking at our government like babies. And why wasn't the market force helping it? So I think those things are probably a bigger issue.
Why are you so ambitious? It's already pushing midnight and you're talking to me. What drives you?
First of all, I work in so many different time zones, right? And because of the whole COVID-19 thing, I don't have to show up to work in the morning at a certain time to keep the morale of the team up. What drives me? I think it's just, it's such a privilege, right? To be able to engage with such interesting ideas and work with incredible people, and to be able to work with such good people around the world. I love what I do. I think exploration is very, very, very important to me. So that's what I usually do from the philanthropy side by working with the SETI Institute and working with the United Nations and World Economic Forum and whatnot. I think the biggest contribution that the SETI Institute makes to the world, even to the business world, even to my life, is it keeps things in perspective. You have to look at your Earth from the point of view of somebody outside it, and you have to introduce yourself for who you are to the rest of the universe. Are you ashamed of yourself? Are you proud of yourself? Can you explain why you're doing what you're doing? So if you think that way, it makes life a lot more interesting.
Reema says her work with the SETI Institute, a not-for-profit research organization which stands for the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, helps keep things in perspective, as do her two young children, given her line of work where there's a lot of wheeling and dealing involving big bucks into the wee hours.
You're a mother of two. How do you juggle everything?
The more you do, the more you can do. Really, it's true. Just like moms who are at home, the ones who do all the laundry and the cooking and the cleaning, if somebody asks them, how do you do the work of the cook and the housekeeper and the mother and the wife and the daughter? They do it all, right? So why can't I do all of it too? Somebody gave me this advice early in my career. It was an old Jewish man. He said, the best thing you can do for your career is get married and have kids. It will ground you like nothing else. And given that I am so pro-risk and so have such high tolerance for risk, and I can bet everything I have on something, if I didn't have kids, I would be nuts, because I would take really big risks, even bigger than what I have right now. But because of the fact that I have them, I'm a bit more grounded.
You're originally from Saudi Arabia, now American. You're in a very different world. Saudi Arabia is opening up. If there is somebody who is listening, a woman in Saudi Arabia, what would you tell her?
So I don't have to imagine an imaginary woman, because I go back to Saudi Arabia quite a lot. I have a lot of cousins and family still there. And things are changing. I have cousins, they were educated, they were engineers, they were working for Aramco, which was the best you could do, living there, working for the best company in the country. And then they left to live in Europe and whatnot because they couldn't survive there. And then now they're able to go back and live in Riyadh in an apartment by themselves without worrying about their security. They can drive. So things are changing, but it's changing so quickly that maybe people aren't so ready for it. The decline in the oil prices and the whole basis of their economy is so quickly shifting that it's going to be a different Saudi Arabia altogether for everybody. Women in Saudi Arabia are far more educated than the men in Saudi Arabia today because they couldn't do anything except go to school. In order for them to get out of the house, given how they've grown up, they've required 10 times more courage than just somebody from New York, which I consider myself. I was in New York most of my life. So it took less courage for me than it would take for them to do what they do. So I admire them, I appreciate them, and I wish them well, and they will do amazing things.
More than 5 decades since the first moonshot, as the SpaceX mission reignites the courage and imaginations of what is possible for humankind, can new exploratory efforts lead to greater innovation and more exciting possibilities in a counterpoint to much of what plagues the world today? Are we the masters of our universe? There is plenty of food for thought as the clock strikes midnight in San Francisco. That's Reema Khan, CEO and founder of Green Sands Equity. Hope you enjoyed this insightful conversation. Thank you for tuning in to Maverick Dreamers and Thinkers. We'll be taking a short break to recharge and refresh our perspective. I'm Chloe Cho. Please stay safe and look forward to joining you very soon. Take care.